Hey everyone, this is Jody Vesley again here with the Heartway Pastor and Missionary Caregiver podcast, and we're starting a new season. And this season, we are going to address the topic of church hurt. That term has been used a lot, and it has lots of different connotations associated with it. A lot of people don't know exactly what it means. And before we get into that, though, I do want to say that, and this will kind of answer the question of what it is as well, is I've since being back in Texas in this area and serving as a care pastor at Horizon Baptist Church, I have noticed that a lot of people have been struggling with, or know people who are struggling with church hurt, real hurt in different situations and church settings, whether it be abuse, whether it be bullying from leadership, whether it be major issues, major situations that happen in a church setting that are being swept under the rug. There's, whether it be an unbiblical removal from the church of a particular individual or individuals. There's so many types of hurt that can be experienced and many times are experienced in church settings. And so even if from that you stuck in with staying at a church or went to a different church and are plugged in and serving today, those situations can still affect how you serve in a church. It can affect your relationship with God. It can affect how effectively you follow God and how you love others and how you serve with others in a church setting. And so even if you are in church today after hurt, there's still great effects that it can have on you. And even there's many of us, though, that have left church and maybe aren't in church or haven't been in church in a while because of some situation, some massive hurt that happened in church in the past. And so whatever the situation may be, or maybe you just know someone who is in that situation, this podcast, these episodes are for you. And what these episodes are going to consist of are basically what I'm going to cover in 4 different sessions in a church hurt seminar that I'm doing in Missouri City, Texas. And by the time that these episodes are released, the seminar will be over. But the goal is to reach out to these people who are struggling with this type of hurt and minister to them and help them to get the tools necessary to move forward, help them to reframe what happened from a biblical sense, in hopes that they might see the hope through Jesus and his plan for them moving forward. So there's a lot that can be learned from about this topic that can be helpful to those who minister to people who have been hurt and those who are in situations where they have been hurt in church. So the first episode here is one of 4, and it's on present church hurt realities. And I want to start this session with kind of a personal testimony here. In the beginning of 2005, I was 18 years old. I was baptized. I joined a church. In fact, I have an episode all about where I shared my testimony in earlier podcast episodes. At this time in 2005, I was super excited to learn and to grow in my faith. I was getting involved in any way I could in the church. And just over a year after that, the church had a meeting. And I knew it was a big meeting. I knew of somewhat was going to happen in this meeting, but the meeting did not turn out how I expected it to turn out. The pastor at that time had been having anger outbursts in the community for a while. One time it even ended up with him in a holding cell in jail, but he quickly got a church member that was very loyal to him to get him out quickly, with the majority of the church having no idea this happened. His outbursts were even sometimes directed toward specific church members, particularly I think at that time deacons' wives and some deacons as well. Well, at some point, one of the deacons decided to address the pastor about his anger and asked if he would be willing to go through some anger management. The pastor, from my understanding, refused, not even admitting he had an issue. So then the deacon came with the other 3 deacons of the church at that time and approached him about the same thing. Again, the pastor refused, and then after that, this big church meeting was called. It was at this meeting that I got to see firsthand and decently early in my church involvement, which at this time was less than 2 years, how hurtful church can be. At this meeting, names were called, accusations were made, and the pastor refused to get anger management or admit to anger issues. And the church split, with all of the leaders in the church, for the most part, besides the pastor, leaving the church. And many followed those, and especially after seeing this unrepentant and unchrist-like attitude of the pastor at this meeting. And it was a very weird time for me, since I had gotten really involved in the church and had even surrendered to the ministry by this point. I mean, this was the first church I was in, and I too had left at this time, and we all got together and guess what? Formed another church. The first church quickly faded and closed. The second church is still in existence to this day. I will say that the fallout of that meeting was vast, with many people not stepping foot inside a church again for years after. And many others' views of church and willingness to trust and serve in church was greatly affected by this event, and the events that took place during this meeting and split. And so the hurt that was experienced by the sin of unrepentance, of anger, name calling, and unwillingness to forgive and work together for the cause of Christ was very impactful and long lasting to many in that church. In addition, that overflowed to their families and friends and community. And since that event, God has used me in other churches and in missions, and now He has called me to a unique ministry to minister to those who minister, and I'm in a role in a church to help those who are hurting. And I've gone over those things in previous podcasts as well. Gabby and I are originally from the area we're in now in South Houston, Greater Houston area. We have seen Houston expand and grow into the surrounding communities more and more. We know the area and feel for the area. I can say that coming back to this area in 2020, we have seen and heard of the effects of church hurt among members and ministers more and more. We have seen that usually church hurt is swept under the rug in churches, in our minds, in our hearts, and in our souls. Periodically, during a deep moment, it might peek out at us, right? But then we sweep it back under the rug. Well, the reality is that hurt is not out of us. It's still there. It's still in us. It is actually a deep wound that needs to be healed. For some of us, that wound might be infected, and the infection actually might be spreading. For others of us, that wound might be covered up with a Band-Aid. It's not sufficient, right? For others of us, we have applied ointment to the wound, but it keeps coming back, not fully healing. And for others of us, we might have some wounds fully healed, but the scars are still visible. The hurt still has an effect on us, a visible effect. And this seminar is not that we're doing. It's not about Church Hurt. It's not a gimmick. It's not a sales pitch. It's a chance for anyone there to. It's not a chance for someone to guilt you into coming into a church. It's not a place where you will be forced to share about your hurt. It's the seminar that we did, or in my case, from my position in recording this, is what I'm going to be doing is instead an opportunity for you to take a step towards healing those deep wounds. And that's what this podcast is for as well. These episodes, it's an opportunity for you to take a step towards healing those deep wounds, and it's an opportunity for you to add some tools to your tool belt to help yourself and others with Church Hurt. This series of podcasts, it's an opportunity to gain wisdom and understanding on how to recover from and prevent Church Hurt in the future, and not just continually sweep it under the rug. So I'm sure in addition to this story I shared, we all have stories that we could share about Church Hurt that would fill up days and more. Church Hurt is very real, and it is very present. So now we're going to get into some of the stats of Church Hurt. There's some research that was done. And so this research that was done basically compiled data from 1,581 adults living in the United States, and it concluded that likely around 1/3 of U.S. adults, on a conservative estimate, have experienced religious trauma at some point in their life. And so that's important to remember, that's a significant amount of people that have gone through religious trauma. And so that may not be fully inclusive of all aspects of Church Hurt, but these people show symptoms of religious trauma, and so it would be very possible that they did experience Church Hurt. So that's a lot of people that are also struggling or have struggled. And so you're not alone, obviously, if you've been through Church Hurt or are going through it now. Another thing to keep in mind is it's not the primary reason that people are leaving the congregation. There are congregations that 10 million people have stopped attending church because of hurt and suffering they encountered there. That's a lot of people that have stopped attending church because of hurt and suffering that were experienced there because of Church Hurt. And that's hard to believe that even with that amount of people, it's not the primary reason people are leaving their congregations. And so, but it is significant though. Basically what's happened recently is there's, in churches all over the world, there's scandal, after another, and this has been going on for years. There's abuses of power, there's cover-ups, and all of these things have taken a toll on the credibility of churches. And for many survivors of Church Hurt, the primary reason they end up staying in church is because they join a different congregation or denomination, or even a tradition. And so this is important to remember as well, after this, that considering all of this, is that a lot of people do leave their churches, and a lot of times even their denominations. I've seen that a lot, even as somebody who ministers to missionaries and pastors, that because they go through hurt as well. They're a part of churches, and sometimes they're the causes of hurt. Sometimes they're the receivers of hurt. But regardless, they do a lot of times leave the church either willingly or because they're forced out, and many times they'll even go to a different denomination. Because depending on the denomination, some of the denominations are quite small, and once your name has been connected to some event, whether you were the cause of it or not, you are labeled in that denomination. And so that's part of the reason too that some pastors and missionaries go to a different denomination after some extreme church hurt that they go through. Even with all this considered, there's still many church hurt survivors who have left abusive congregations but have still not yet found or joined another church home for various reasons. A lot of what happened with the pandemic and COVID have also had a part in this. Many believers, according to this expert Mike Moore, in an article he wrote for Christianity Today, he says that these past few years have left many believers stuck in ecclesial purgatory, and they're uncertain on how to re-engage with church. And so that's not helpful either. But yeah, people who go through church hurt are sometimes uncertain on how to re-engage with church again, how to get back into church. And so they're just stuck outside of it. In this next section, I want to define really what church hurt is. And one way you can look at it, besides religious trauma, would be spiritual abuse that happens in a church setting or from someone that's in church. And what is spiritual abuse? Well, spiritual abuse usually involves someone in a position of spiritual authority. Depending on the type of church you're involved in, the type of denomination, that can be people who are pastors, it can be people who are elders, it can potentially be deacons in some churches, it can be teachers, it can be ministry leaders, there's really, it can be parents, it can even be somebody who doesn't even necessarily have a title, but they just seek out control or have a lot of respect in a church. Spiritual abuse is also something that involves sinful methods of controlling and domineering others. Manipulation, right? Not being honest, using power to control others, threatening others, all of these things, depending on the type of church, the culture of that church, this can look different in some types of churches, some denominations. There's a heavy respect toward the pastor, and he kind of can abuse that because people respect what he says goes, and he can abuse people in that type of position. In other settings, maybe the pastor doesn't have that type of power, but maybe one or two or a few other people in the church do, and they abuse that power as well and run things themselves and dominate the church, and whatever they say goes. And in a negative sense, this can have a really negative spiritual effect on the people in the church. Also, spiritual abuse is hypercritical. I mean, we all face criticism, but to be hypercritical is to go above and beyond that, like where you're not necessarily attacking a person for what they do. I mean, you're attacking a person for instead of an issue. You're attacking someone and who they are instead of what they've done. And you just find every little bit of problem here and there and everywhere to complain about, to criticize. One time I was at a church and the music minister had done his normal worship service, and then one of his overly critical members toward specific pastoral stuff came and up to that guy after service and told him the only thing worse than that worship service was the worship service before. And so that's really hypercritical and really just cruel, which is another thing that spiritual abuse is just cruel. There's no good in it. It's just cruel. It's just mean. Spiritual abuse is also threatening. When you threaten people with some things, I know that talking about people who have power that aren't pastors or have a defined paid position in a church, they might threaten to leave a church. Like, let's say they're a wealthy individual. This happens quite often. Where in a church there's some wealthy family or families or individuals, and they've contributed a lot financially to the church. They may threaten to leave the church if certain things aren't done the way they would like. That is spiritual abuse. Defensive. Spiritual abuse is defensive. It is manipulative. And most importantly, it's building their own kingdom, not God's. Are you building your own kingdom? Or are you building God's kingdom? Is the pastor building the church of whatever his name is, where everything is based on him and his desires and his wants? Or is it about God's kingdom, what God wants? Is the church, is the pastor seeking out God's will and looking biblically to what they should do and exercising biblical principles and biblical character? Another thing we should look at in defining church hurt is what church hurt is and what spiritual abuse isn't. It's not being unfriendly. That there's unfriendly people everywhere. Even Christians are unfriendly. There's always going to be unfriendly people. So just because somebody isn't friendly toward you, that's not church hurt. An intimidating personality. Some people are just more intimidating than others. They speak more directly. And I live in the south part of the U.S. and some people especially do not like when other people speak directly. They prefer soft approaches and indirect conversation. Well, some people are just very direct, and being very direct and vocal, they can come across as intimidating. But that's not church hurt. That's just someone's personality. Not getting along, that's not church hurt. I mean, the reality is we're not going to always get along with everybody. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be problems. And that's okay. If there's something that you can do to make things better with that person, that's fine. But it's not our job to make people happy in church. We can't make everybody happy. Unfortunately, that's just not a possibility, and it's not a realistic goal. Spiritual abuse also in church hurt isn't accidentally hurting someone. Sometimes people get hurt and we didn't specifically call them a name or do something to them. They just get hurt because maybe we didn't look at them and greet them that particular morning at church, or maybe you didn't call them when they were sick or something. This is accidentally hurting someone. You're not going out of your way to hurt them. Spiritual abuse for church isn't confronting people's sins. All right. People are going to sin. And sometimes, like, sins need to be dealt with, especially when they're affecting the church and there's unrepentant sins. There's cases where people just kind of lose it in a church setting and start going off the deep end and start getting involved in affairs and causing problems in churches, causing just really breaking up the peace of the church and causing divisions. These sins have to be confronted, and if you're, if somebody does that, they may be removed from the congregation. They may be removed from the church, and that person should be given the opportunity to repent, and to change their heart, and to say they're sorry, and for amends to be made. But sometimes the chance for repentance is given, and people still refuse, and they're asked to leave the church. That happens, and that's not spiritual abuse. That's not church hurt. That's not what we're talking about in these sessions. Okay. Another thing to be aware of in defining church hurt is pastors who are bullying, recognizing what they're doing. They will oftentimes build a coalition of defenders, people who will defend them at all cost. They will insist proper process wasn't followed. If there's some issues, saying that, well, you didn't go through the right process. This is why I'm getting my way. You didn't follow our bylaws. You didn't follow the Bible. You didn't go through the Matthew 18 principle. Proper process wasn't followed. Pastors, when they bully, they'll claim to be victims of slander. They'll victimize themselves, that they're in this position when really they aren't. They'll attack the character of victims. Maybe pointing out that they're not a very good Christian, not very good with their attendance, things like that. Pastors who are bullying, they'll tout their own character and accomplishments, and so they'll brag on what they do, and they'll play the sympathy card. They will get people on their side. There will be people on their side. They'll make people feel bad for them. Oh, it's a servant of the church. We need to feel bad for them, even though they're taking advantage of us. And that's just not the case. That's not what should happen. It's also important to understand the effects of spiritual abuse and church hurt. There's going to be fear, the effect of fear. If you've been through church hurt, hard church hurt, it might make you fearful toward church, towards specific people in church, people in specific positions. You might have anger toward the church or toward people or certain positions in the church. You might experience shame, especially, going through something like abuse, like sexual abuse or something. Shame is a big thing that victims experience from those types of church hurt. Depression, that can be long-lasting and hard to recognize. But yeah, you can be depressed from church hurt. You can experience something like PTSD, where you're having those same kind of effects as somebody who's been through a traumatic situation, and now they're affected by it. Where you're almost just on edge and expecting something bad to happen again. Another effect is just different physical effects, like, again, that you would be having after a traumatic situation, increased heart rate, sweating, those types of things. Increased anxiety, maybe, increased stress, relational effects. It can affect our relationships, our ability to have good relationships when we go through church hurt. It can cause us, church hurt can cause us to have doubts about the church, doubts about Christianity, doubts about God, and even doubts about ourselves. When things don't happen in a church like we read about that God intends for them to happen, it really affects us. So we're going to see in the next episode that there is a lot of church hurt in the Bible, and it's been around a long time, and so it's really not unique to our time now, and we need to be aware of those things and how it was dealt with in biblical times. But that's the next episode. So we're going to go through types of church hurt, and some of these we might go through quicker since I might have already addressed some of them, but here's some different types of church hurt. Number one, church splits, where you maybe will lose close friends, or people you're close to in your church. This can be traumatic. It can cause you to hold unforgiveness in your heart, which can then lead to bitterness. If you might get mad at somebody for causing the split, or a certain group of people for causing the split, and you can become bitter toward them, not forgiving them in your heart. It is sad when a church splits, and losing people that you're close to, that can have an effect on you for a long time. Definitely. It's a wound. It's a wound from church. Pastoral affairs is such a big one right now in our current time. At least we're talking about it more. I know it's been something that's happened a long time, but it just seems to be in the news more now. Pastoral affairs that can happen with members or non-members, whether they come forward first or not. Sometimes the pastor does come forward to the church and say, "Hey, I messed up. I had an affair," and that can affect the church. Obviously, it will have an effect on the church. It maybe is a little bit different situation if they're in the affair and then someone else comes forward. Maybe the person they're having the affair with comes forward and says, "Hey, I'm sleeping with the pastor." This is a whole nother thing. Of course, I think it's even worse if the affair is happening with a member. It can get really messy, and if the family is in the church, if the pastor has family and the family's in the church, really, really, really messy. And pastoral affairs, they can lead to distrust of pastors, and they can lead to you leaving that church, even if the pastor is dismissed or steps back. We're gonna go more into recovering from church hurt, but there is a process that some churches go through to allow pastors to repent and to recover. And in some cases, pastors stay with their families, they stay with their churches. It's not normal, but I would like to say it's just not normal for this to happen, but it can happen, especially if we are active as a church in creating opportunities for that. Maybe in your particular beliefs, you wouldn't want to be in a church like that anyways. That's fine. Maybe it's just needed for you to, maybe the church can realize that and understand that if this happens at the church, the pastor needs to be dismissed and go somewhere else. That's something the church has to decide. But anyways, there's hurt that comes from pastoral affairs. We talked about the some pastoral and leadership bullying. I'm going to give some examples from a book called Healing Your Church Hurt by Stephen Mansfield. Here's an example of this in this book. It says, "I committed a sin and confessed it to one of my pastors privately, But then one Sunday, I found myself rebuked in front of everybody. I'll never go back to that church again. Yeah, when a pastor or leader, a spiritual leader, shares confidential information that you shared with them, that's bullying. That's messed up. That's spiritual abuse from a pastor, from church leadership. Here's another example from the same book. I went to a church where I was the only Democrat, and the pastor hated me so much that he sometimes mentioned me during his sermon. So I just left. I know that we probably have people all over the political spectrum listening to this, but I'm not going to speak a whole lot to politics, but that this is not right to call someone out about their political platform from the pulpit or to the church. This is not loving. This is not edifying. This is not helpful, and it's spiritual abuse toward this person. Here's another example of pastoral and leadership bullying. You can sometimes be made to feel unwelcome regularly because you have tattoos, or because of your race, or because of your ethnicity, or because of your clothing. You can just be made to feel unwelcome. Maybe comments will be made about those things. And again, this is when coming from a spiritual leader. This is spiritual abuse. It is bullying. It is not right. So you can't, obviously in a church you can't change what people are going to say. We have people in every church I've been in who have said dumb things to people. You can't, that's just going to happen. Understand that's going to happen. But when it's coming from leadership, someone in a place of spiritual, has a spiritual position in the church, it's church hurt. Another type of church hurt is maybe church leadership sweeping major issues under the rugs. Again, from the same book, Healing Your Church Hurt. Here's an example. My pastor got caught up in his office doing inappropriate things with the secretary, and when the board found out, they just covered it up. This happens so much, and we probably only hear just a little bit of how much this happens. Really messed up, and it leads to church hurt for the church. Another example of church leadership sweeping major issues under the rug is any accusations, especially from women or youth, toward leaders in the church. I really want to encourage anyone listening to take any accusation seriously. You can't not take it seriously. Every accusation has to be taken seriously. In the church, it's a little bit different if somebody has a history of compulsively lying, but really you just have to take each accusation seriously and deal with them. If you don't, then imagine that someone is being abused in your church and you didn't listen to them, and how much more abuse is going to happen. Imagine the hurt of all those people affected by that. Another type of church hurt is physical abuse. Maybe teachers hitting kids in church. Maybe churchy men physically abusing their wives and families at home. Churchy men. Fathers, husbands, people are supposed to be the spiritual leaders in their homes, but using that position incorrectly and physically abusing their families, whether it's at church or not. Sexual abuse. Another example from from Healing Your Church Hurt. I was on the staff of a church where the pastor kept making inappropriate comments to the young girls, and when I mentioned it to him, he fired me. Obviously, this person was on the staff there. we shouldn't stand for this. If we hear people making inappropriate comments to others at church, especially sexual comments, definitely we need to address that. We need to not just let it go because they're a person of respect, a long-time church member, a big giver in the church. We have to address those things. Other types of sexual abuse that happen at church, rapes, whether it be on church grounds or other places by church members, happens more often than I would ever like to think. But it doesn't, we need to be aware of it. Church hurt can also be sexual abuse from inappropriate touching from members, especially to kids or women. Porn exposure at church from someone in church. That's another form of sexual abuse that can happen. That is church hurt. Also, financial abuse is another form of church hurt. In this example from Healing Your Church Hurt, it says, I gave generously to my church, and then I found out that the buildings and property were owned by a single family, and that all my giving just made them rich. Finances not being handled correctly. Just not good. Lots of distrust in church again and in giving, and that's really sad. But it can happen. Another form of financial abuse, leadership personally pocketing money. Another form, not honestly reporting funds. Things aren't reported correctly, and it misshows the uses of finances at church. Leadership misusing funds. Another form of financial abuse is guilting people into giving. If you give, God will heal you, like the televangelist. Give to me, you'll be healed, you'll have this. That's financial abuse. That's church hurt. It's not true. It's a lie. That's not the reason that God would heal you. Spiritual abuse can happen with pastoral bullying, physical abuse. All of the types of abuse are also spiritual abuse. False teaching that's damaging, like prosperity gospel. If you get medical treatment, then you don't have faith. Being told you can't question authority. All these false teachings can be damaging and spiritually abusing. Another form of church hurt, the last one we're going to address, is unbiblical excommunication. Being kicked out of a church because someone that has a high position in the church doesn't like you. That would be an unbiblical excommunication. Getting kicked out of a church because of legalism, like you work at a grocery store that sells alcohol, or you get a tattoo. That's, again, another form of unbiblical excommunication. People are not using the Bible, but their own opinions for reasons why you should be not at that church. All right. Well, that is a lot, but that's the present church hurt realities I want to get into on this first session. And next time we'll get into church hurt in the Bible, and then we'll get into healing from church hurt, and then preventing church hurt. And so thank you so much for listening. If you have anything that you would like to share for me to include in any of my future podcasts, please do so. My email is jodie@heartwaycare.org. And until next time, this is the Heartway Pastor and Missionary Caregiver Podcast, where we seek to help with issues at the source.